Hello, everyone. This is Julie McAllen back with Rob Pike to present to you part 6 of the series Revelation Reality, the Victory of Jesus. Rob, last week as we were closing, you mentioned that before we begin looking at the visions of judgment that John saw in the book of Revelation, it would probably be a good idea to take a step back and look again at the big picture view of the Olivet Discourse from Matthew 24 and 25. And that made sense to me because it sets the stage for the events which the Apostle John saw in the Apocalypse. So where do you think we should begin, Rob?
Well, as you know, we took several episodes earlier to look at Mark's version of the Olivet Discourse, but we find that Matthew's version adds much more detail. In fact, another whole chapter. Toward the end of Matthew 24, we see Jesus giving the disciples several examples of how and why they need to keep their eyes open as to what was taking place around them. So in a quick review from Matthew 24, we see that Jesus gave him these parables. First, the parable of the flood of Noah's day and how they were caught unaware, leading to their destruction. Then the 2 men in the field and the 2 women grinding at the mill and how they were caught unaware. Then he gave the illustration of the master of the house, which was broken into because of the fact that he didn't know the thief was coming. And he followed this by telling them that they should be like the faithful and wise servants who nourish their families at the proper time. I think these are all important parables to consider as a prelude to looking at the visions given to John. Don't you, Julie?
Yeah, Rob, you just mentioned 5 parables given at the end of Matthew 24, and they're all emphasizing the need to be watchful and conscientious in the coming days of that generational period of time. Jesus was definitely emphasizing that they needed to watch carefully. And just to solidify that, in verse 42, Jesus stated, "Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming." So to answer your question, I would say yes, it's very important.
Yeah, and then when we begin to look at Matthew 25, Jesus gives us still more parables. We know that most commentators have decided that Matthew 25 is looking into the distant future, but that our Lord refers exclusively to the consummation of all things and the judgment of the human race at that time is not really what it says. However, the reason that they do this is unclear, isn't it? Why do you think they do that? I mean, I don't see any language at the start of this passage that confirms that. Do you?
No, I don't. And as to why they do it, I suppose maybe because it's, a new chapter in our modern Bibles. But we have to remember that when the Olivet Discourse was recorded, written down by Matthew, there were no chapter breaks. It was just one long discourse. So we have to ask the question, did Jesus really, just switch subjects in his discourse with no indication given? Had he truly gone from speaking about things that would happen within that same generation to something that would happen in a later future, So if that was so, wouldn't you think there would be some kind of indication from Jesus as to when the subject had changed?
Yes.
Otherwise, how would the disciples know where that break was? It would be a source of confusion in their minds, especially since they were so hungry for truth. But the truth is that there is absolutely no such comment to be found anywhere in either chapter.
That's right. There's no such language in there anywhere. Instead, after having given some of the most shocking signs imaginable about what was going to take place, such as the temple being destroyed, oh my goodness, and all within that same generation, he gives some more parables to indicate the importance of how they need to stay awake. And as chapter 25 opens up, we see Jesus giving the parable of the 10 virgins. Now, as we stated last week, it's not our purpose in here to go to the details of all these parables. All that we need to do is look at the purpose of them, because going into that discussion would be out of the scope of discussion of the book of Revelation. So don't you agree that this is necessary, Julie?
Yes, and it appears the purpose in Jesus' giving all these parables was to add emphasis to the fact that they needed to be watchful. Like I said, I mean, after all, the parousia, or the appearing of the Lord in the clouds of glory, was promised to occur in that same generation. And with regard to the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus was stressing the importance of remaining in that state of readiness.
Yes, he was. And as we saw from the parable that you just spoke of, the 5 of the 10 virgins were foolish and lackadaisical with regard to their duties. Thus, they would miss the all-important wedding event and would miss the marriage supper of the Lamb. So as you stated, no, there is no switching of the time frame going on here. Jesus is still talking about things which would shortly in that same generation take place. And next, in Matthew 25, we see the parable of the talents. I found it interesting that J. Stuart Russell had some very important things to say about this. He said that whereas the moral of the parable of the 10 virgins was vigilance because they were to remain watchful, the moral of the parable of the talents was diligence. In this parable, he was telling them to be diligent with the information they were being given. I thought that comment was really spot on, didn't you, Julie?
Yeah, it was. And this truly emphasizes the fact that what they did in the near future was really important. Their actions would determine whether or not they would hear the words from their master. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, and I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. That's from Matthew 25:23. So all of those parables served the purpose of seeing to it that they understood with great clarity that there was great danger ahead, and they should keep awake, lest that day should come upon them and find them painfully unprepared and unaware.
Right.
And Rob, all of this would lead up to the judgment that would take place at the parousia, which was the appearing of the Son of Man in the clouds. So there was no deviation here from the original topic, was there, Rob?
Well, our Lord didn't open up the chapter by saying, okay, now I'm going to switch subjects. I'm going to leave this time frame and start talking to you about the final judgment of all mankind, which will take place in the distant future. There's no indication of such thing that being said in there. No such words. The same theme is maintained, which was the approaching doom of the guilty city of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel, all to take place within the period of that generation, and which the disciples, or at least some of them, would live to witness. In fact, Matthew 25:31 ties all of this together with a single word at the start of the text, doesn't it, Julie?
I'm glad you brought that up, Rob. In fact, let's look at that verse. First, in the English Standard Version, the publishers have added a subheading just above that verse, which reads, the final judgment. And then we read the verse, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. But it looks like they left out a word. Did you notice that, Rob?
Yes, I did. And it's another very disappointing thing by the translators of the English Standard Version. I hate to say it also, but by putting that heading, the final judgment, in there, just before the parable of the sheep and the goats, we see another example of translator bias. But other translations have also left out that all-important word, and you know what it is. What is it, Julie?
Well, let's compare it, the verse, to a couple other versions and discover. From the New American Standard Bible, it reads this way, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Looks like they left out the word but. Did you notice that from the first reading? And looking at Young's literal translation, we see that it reads, and whenever the Son of Man may come in his glory and all the holy messengers with him, then he shall sit upon a throne of his glory. Small word, yet very important in that it is a transition as well as a connection to what is mentioned before it. Isn't that right, Rob?
Yes, it very much is. I'd like to quote what James Stuart Russell, the author of the book, The Parousia, had to say about this all-important word that shows this is not just the beginning of a new timeline. He said, this parable, though in our English version, standing apart and unconnected with the context, is really connected by a very sufficient link with what goes before. This is a parent in the Greek, where we find the participle, the force of which is to indicate a transition and connection, transition to a new illustration, and a connection with the foregoing context. Alford, in his Revised New Testament, preserves the continuation particle, but when the Son of Man shall come in his glory. It might be with equally propriety that it be rendered and when. So, Julie, this Greek word day, which is either and or but, is crucial to the understanding of the text. I can look in any one of the 5 interlinear Bibles that I have, and you can see that it's in there. It begins with the Greek words hoton dei, translated as but when, or and when, as I'm showing in this slide here. This is from the McReynolds Bible, as I'm showing here, the McReynolds interlinear Bible. To leave this translation out is to do a great disservice to the readers, don't you think?
That's a really good point, Rob. This word is suspiciously missing in the KJV, the NKJV, the NIV, the ESV, to name a few of the most important popular Bible translations that people are, reading. So you can see why there's, this misinformation going around. Nonetheless, Russell is correct there. The connecting word day is there in the Greek, and it does without question play an important role in that it ties this all to the other parables that were mentioned. They all refer to this generation, Matthew 24:31. In fact, we notice that the verse we just read sounds very much like something Jesus already stated in Matthew 16:27 and 28. For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. It appears that he's using slightly different words to show the exact same thing. Don't you think, Rob?
Yes, and also if you look closely at those passages, you find several common things. I'm going to name off a few of them. In both passages, the subject referred to is the same, which is the coming of the Son of Man in that all-important event called the parousia. In both passages, he's describing his coming in glory, attended by angels. And in both, it says he comes as the king who is coming in his kingdom, and he shall sit upon his throne. In both, he comes to render judgment, and in both, the judgment is represented by some sense all-inclusive and judged based on their works. Yes, those things are all in common, and they're all in these verses.
So, yeah, and also we see that in Matthew 16:28, it's expressly stated that this coming in glory, etc., all the things you read, was to take place in the lifetime of some of those who were present, then present at that time. This unquestionably fixes the occurrence of the parousia within the limit of a human life, thus being in perfect accord with the period defined by our Lord in his prophetic discourse. This generation shall not pass. So we can conclude that the coming judgment mentioned was not sometime in the distant future, but within the generation to whom Jesus spoke. But what about that phrase, and before him shall be gathered all the nations, Rob? It kind of sounds like there is a much broader reference than just those local nations at that time, doesn't it?
Well, I can see how that would be misleading. But once again, if we look at the Greek word as translated, it's the word ethne, or the common nominative form, which is the word ethnos. And this word actually refers to ethnic groups, which allows for it to be translated as followed, according to Strong's Greek dictionary definition, where it says, Strong's 1484, ethnos, probably from 1486, a race, tribe, specialty, a foreign, non-Jewish one, usually by implication pagan, Gentile, heathen, nation, or people. So with this, we can clearly see that Jesus was referring to the ethnic groups around Judea. In fact, this same Greek word ethnos appears in what is commonly called the Great Commission, where it states, "Go ye therefore and disciple all the ethnos," or the nations. That's according to the Rotherham version. That's the way it reads.
Ah, okay. So with these words spoken by Jesus himself, it removes all doubt that he was speaking of his coming judgment upon the Jewish nation, including the destruction of Jerusalem within this generation, AD 70. I think it's important to read the passage beginning in Matthew 25:34, which confirms this point.
Okay.
Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in, naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" The king will answer and say to them, "Truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me." Matthew 25:34-40. Now, let's put this in the time frame of the subject of which Jesus is speaking here. He is speaking of the time that he was alive on the earth. Those who existed before Jesus was born could not be judged according to his words here, for the very fact that he was not yet present. Therefore, those alive before he was born could not have forsaken him in such a manner. Yes, he was speaking to the sheep on his right, who were alive during his lifetime and did the deeds spoken of here. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Now, I think we probably ought to continue this verse all the way down through 46, because there's some very important things in here. It says, now this, we're reading from the Rotherhams once again. "Then will he say unto those also on his left hand, Depart ye from me, accursed ones, into the age-abiding fire, which hath been prepared for the adversary and his messengers. For I hungered, and ye gave me not to eat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me not to drink. A stranger was I, and you took me not in your home. Yet naked, and ye clothed me not. Sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then will they also answer, saying, Lord, when we saw thee hungry, or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and ministered not unto thee? Then he answered them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not unto one of these least, neither unto me did ye it. And these shall go away into age-abiding correction, but the righteous into age-abiding life." Julie, now clearly we see the judgment of those called the goats on the left. From the account of Acts of the Apostles all the way through the epistles of John, we see that the persecution of the church was not only undertaken by the religious leaders of the Jewish nation, it was started and led by them. And this parable shows how the king of the Jews was now judging the nation and was about to bring an end to the entire Jewish age. I would also like to add that this passage has been abused by many preachers, not only to indicate a future judgment, but to try to prove the false doctrine of eternal torment. There is a lot more that I could say about this aspect of the message, Julie, but it's out of the scope of discussion.
Yeah, I get that. But from all of this, we see that there's no reason to believe that the disciples did not understand every word of his parables. Jesus did not confuse them by jumping from events to happen in their time and then some future generation. It's not a judgment upon the whole world in general, but a judgment of guilty upon the entire religious system of the Jewish age. That's what I'm seeing in that.
Yes, it is. I mean, and I'm sure just like you said, the disciples understood that clearly. And like we said earlier, Luke presented it properly when he said, "For these are days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written." All of this sets a stage for the visions given to by the Apostle John in the Apocalypse, doesn't it, Julie?
Oh boy, yes, it does. So this has been good, but when we come back in our next episode, we'll take up where we left off in chapter 4 of the book of Revelation. So if you like what you're hearing, please hit the like button and also subscribe to this channel so you won't miss any upcoming episodes. And if you've been watching us for a while, you know that I like to sign off by saying, keep yourselves in God's love. In case you didn't know, that's from Jude's letter, which was written as encouragement to the beloved followers of Christ who were experiencing mocking from those who had crept in and were devoid of the Spirit. And Jude told them to contend earnestly for the faith and to keep themselves in the love of God. And it's our prayer that these weekly lessons are helping you to do the same thing.
Yes, Julie. And I think that's great admonition that you give every week to keep yourself in God's love. And I always like to say something from the Apostle Paul that he said many times in a few different words. May God's grace be with you always, and have a great day. See you next week.
Yeah, see you next week, Bob. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.